The silent marriage. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows of the Blackwell mansion, catching the gold veins in the marble floor and spreading warmth that didn't quite reach the hearts of those who lived there. Evelyn Hart moved quietly, her steps soft and deliberate like someone afraid to disturb a fragile peace. The house was beautiful, breathtaking even, but it was also unbearably silent. For 3 years that silence had been her companion, more loyal than her husband Lucas Blackwell, the man whose name she carried but whose heart she never touched. Every morning she rose before dawn, prepared breakfast in the grand kitchen that could host a small army, and waited for the sound of his footsteps on the staircase. She could set her clock by him at 6:15 exactly. His routine was as coldly precise as the man himself. The smell of his black coffee, no sugar, no milk, filled the room long before he appeared, dressed in a dark suit, watch gleaming, hair perfectly in place. He would take his coffee with a polite nod that felt more like a business acknowledgement than affection. Not once in 3 years had he said good morning with warmth. Not once had he kissed her cheek. To the world, they were the perfect couple, the quiet, elegant wife and the brilliant, composed millionaire CEO. To Evelyn, they were strangers bound by a paper ring and family debt. The marriage had been her mother's desperate attempt to save their collapsing business, a last-minute deal offered to the man who had once been her late father's investor. Lucas had agreed not out of love, but necessity. He needed a wife to silence rumors that threatened his company's image, and she needed someone who could keep her family from ruin. It was supposed to be temporary, a transaction between two souls who owed too much to walk away, but years had passed and neither had dared to change the rules. Evelyn had learned to move through her days like a ghost. She had her corner of the mansion, her art studio tucked beside the east garden, where she painted the emotions she couldn't speak. Her canvases were filled with muted blues, stormy grays, and fragile touches of gold that represented hope, small and trembling but still alive. Sometimes when she painted late at night, she thought she heard Lucas moving in the hallway outside her studio, pausing as if he wanted to say something, but the footsteps always faded, and the silence returned heavier than before. Lucas Blackwell was a man carved from discipline. Every inch of his life was planned, measured, and controlled. He had built his empire from the ground up, turning a small logistics firm into one of the most powerful international corporations in the country. He didn't believe in chaos, and emotions were chaos. He had watched his own parents destroy each other with their passions, his father's temper, his mother's tears, and he had sworn never to repeat that weakness. Marriage to him was a contract, not a connection. Evelyn was beautiful, graceful, intelligent, but she belonged to a part of his life he didn't know how to approach. She represented vulnerability, and vulnerability terrified him. That morning began like all others. Lucas took his coffee and scrolled through his emails at the kitchen island while Evelyn quietly buttered toast. The only sound was the clink of cutlery, but when she reached for the fruit bowl, her sleeve brushed his arm. A fleeting, accidental touch, and for a strange second everything stopped. Lucas froze, his gray eyes lifting from the screen. Evelyn's breath caught as their gazes met. Something unspoken flickered between them, something raw and real that neither understood. But just as quickly he looked away. "You should have the accounts ready for the charity foundation," he said flatly, returning to his phone. The moment was gone, buried under formality. Evelyn nodded, her heart sinking back into its familiar rhythm of disappointment. After he left, she sat alone, staring at the untouched breakfast across from her. Sometimes she wondered what would happen if she simply stopped. Stopped cooking, stopped waiting, stopped pretending. Would he even notice? The thought hurt more than she wanted to admit. She rose from the table, walked to the window, and watched his car disappear down the long driveway lined with maple trees. The mansion looked perfect from the outside, like something out of a magazine. Inside, it was a museum of unspoken feelings. Later that day, Evelyn visited the Blackwell Foundation headquarters, where she managed the charity branch her husband had set up in name only. Lucas rarely visited, but his assistant Clara always treated Evelyn with deference, perhaps out of pity. The staff respected her kindness. She knew every employee's name, remembered birthdays, listened when people talked. She had made the foundation her refuge, pouring her energy into projects that actually changed lives. Schools for underprivileged children, women's education, disaster relief. For her, helping others filled a void that love should have. Around noon, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs. Blackwell," said a tall man with an easy smile, "you're the only person I know who can make work look like art." It was Daniel Reeves, a project coordinator who had joined 6 months ago. He was warm, passionate, the opposite of Lucas. Where Lucas spoke in numbers, Daniel spoke in dreams. Evelyn smiled politely. "Art is easier than life," she replied. "Canvases don't judge you." Daniel's eyes softened. "Neither should people who care." She looked away quickly, hiding the emotion that threatened to surface. Daniel admired her. Everyone could see it, but Evelyn had built too many walls to let anyone in. When she returned home that evening, the mansion was quiet again. Lucas was in his study, as always, reviewing reports with the focus of a man allergic to distraction. Evelyn paused at the doorway. "Dinner is ready," she said softly. He didn't look up. "I'll eat later." The same words she'd heard 100 times. But this time, something inside her broke a little. She stepped closer. "Lucas," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice, "do you ever get tired of pretending?" He finally looked up, his gray eyes sharp. "Pretending?" he repeated. "Pretending that this is a marriage," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "That we're two people sharing a life instead of two strangers trapped in one house." His jaw tightened. "We have an arrangement that works, does it?" she asked quietly. "Because I don't feel alive in this arrangement." For the first time, he didn't have an immediate answer. His fingers stilled over the papers, his expression unreadable. "You knew what this was when you agreed to it," he said finally. Evelyn smiled sadly. "Yes, I agreed to be your wife on paper, but I didn't agree to disappear as a person." There was a long silence before she turned and walked out. Upstairs, she closed her bedroom door and let out a shaky breath. For the first time, she had spoken her truth aloud, and it both terrified and freed her. She sat on the bed, staring at the empty side where he had never slept. She wondered if Lucas even remembered the color of her eyes or the way she laughed before this life muted her. Downstairs in his study, Lucas sat motionless. Her words echoed in his mind, stirring something long buried. Guilt, regret, maybe even longing. He poured himself a glass of scotch, but it didn't burn away the ache that had taken root in his chest. That night, sleep didn't come easily for either of them. Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the brief moment that morning when their hands had brushed. It was ridiculous how something so small could feel like a heartbeat in a dead room. Lucas, meanwhile, found himself pacing the hallway outside her door, his hand hovering over the handle before pulling back. He didn't know what he would say if he went in. He only knew that the distance between them had never felt heavier. Morning came again, and with it the same routine. But something had changed. Evelyn decided not to make breakfast. She dressed in a soft cream blouse, gathered her hair into a loose knot, and prepared to leave early for the foundation. When Lucas came down, he found the kitchen empty except for a note on the counter. "There's food in the fridge if you want it." It was polite, detached, a reflection of how she had started to detach from him. He stood there for a long moment, the note in his hand, the silence suddenly oppressive. For the first time, he realized how much he had taken that quiet presence for granted. As Evelyn drove away, she felt something shift inside her. Not anger, not sadness, but resolve. She couldn't keep waiting for someone who didn't see her. She would rebuild her life one step at a time, even if that meant breaking free from the invisible cage she had lived in for 3 long years. Back at the mansion, Lucas watched her car disappear down the road, the same road she had traveled every day. But this time it felt different. The absence she left behind wasn't peaceful, it was unbearable. For a man who had spent his life mastering control, the realization was terrifying. He was losing something he didn't even know he needed until now. And for the first time since their wedding day, Lucas Blackwell wondered what it would feel like to reach out, not as a businessman, not as a husband by contract, but as a man who wanted to know the woman standing beside him all these years. When silence starts to break, the next morning dawned cold and gray, and with it came an unease neither Evelyn nor Lucas could name. She drove to the foundation as usual, but her thoughts wandered restlessly between memories and regrets. The night before still clung to her. Her words, his silence, the weight of 3 wasted years pressing down like invisible chains. She wondered if he even noticed that she had finally stopped waiting for him. At the foundation, the air was filled with the scent of coffee and faint laughter from co-workers setting up for the morning briefing. Daniel Reeves greeted her warmly, his sleeves rolled up and his tie loosened in a way that made him seem both confident and approachable. He carried 2 cups of coffee, extending one to her with a smile. "You look like you need this," he said lightly. Evelyn accepted it, surprised by how kind such a simple gesture felt. "Thank you," she murmured. It had been years since someone had done something thoughtful for her without reason or obligation. Throughout the day, they worked side by side on a new project, an initiative to build a school for girls in a remote village. Daniel's energy was contagious. He spoke about his travels, his belief that education could rewrite destiny, and his admiration for her leadership. Evelyn found herself laughing softly, something she hadn't done in months. When their hands brushed as they reached for the same document, a spark of awareness shot through her. She pulled back quickly, guilt washing over her even though she had done nothing wrong. Back at the mansion, Lucas sat behind his desk trying to focus on the numbers glowing on his laptop screen. But the spreadsheet blurred. He hadn't stopped thinking about her words. "You knew what this was when you agreed to it, but I didn't agree to disappear as a person." The statement kept echoing in his mind like a challenge. For years, he had convinced himself that detachment was strength, that emotions only complicated what should remain simple. Yet now he couldn't escape the uneasy realization that perhaps he had built walls so high, he'd trapped himself inside them. When he came downstairs that evening, the kitchen was quiet again. The note she had left the previous morning was gone, replaced by an empty counter. For the first time, he found himself wishing she'd be there to ask him how his day went, even if he would have answered curtly. He walked past her art studio and paused at the half-open door. Inside, the room glowed softly under the golden lamplight. Canvases leaned against the wall, each one filled with color and emotion that words couldn't capture. One painting, half-finished, caught his eye. A silhouette of a woman standing before a storm, her hair whipping in the wind, her face turned toward the light breaking through the clouds. It was beautiful and hauntingly lonely. He realized for perhaps the first time that he had never really seen his wife. Not the woman who smiled politely at public events, not the quiet figure moving through the house, but this woman, full of depth and feeling, who had survived 3 years of silence without breaking. Later that night, Evelyn returned home, exhausted but content from a productive day. As she stepped into her studio to unwind, she froze. Lucas was there, standing before her painting, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said quietly when she appeared in the doorway. His tone lacked its usual sharpness. "I was just curious." Evelyn crossed her arms, wary. "Curious about what?" "About what you see when you look at this," he said, gesturing toward the canvas. She hesitated, unsure whether to speak honestly. But something about his eyes, the faint trace of sincerity, made her lower her guard. "I see a woman standing in the middle of everything falling apart," she said softly, her gaze on the painting. "But she's still looking for the light. She's not giving up." Lucas turned toward her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is that woman you?" Evelyn met his gaze. "Maybe. Or maybe she's who I want to be." For a moment, they stood in the stillness of the room, the air charged with something fragile and new. Lucas wanted to say he was sorry, for the years of distance, for his silence, for being too afraid to reach out, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he said the only thing he could. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "You're very talented." She blinked, startled. In 3 years of marriage, it was the first genuine compliment he had given her. "Thank you," she said quietly, unsure how to process the warmth that bloomed unexpectedly in her chest. Lucas looked around the studio, then back at her. "Why didn't you ever tell me you paint?" "You never asked," she replied simply. He nodded, accepting the truth like a blow. The days that followed were filled with small, almost imperceptible shifts. Lucas began joining her for breakfast, awkwardly at first, unsure of what to say. Evelyn, surprised but cautious, kept her responses polite. They talked about small things, the weather, her projects at the foundation, his upcoming business trip. Nothing deep, but the effort itself was new. For the first time in years, the silence between them felt less suffocating. One afternoon, Evelyn received an unexpected email from an international art foundation. They wanted to feature her paintings at a charity exhibition, having discovered her work through a mutual contact at the foundation. Excited yet nervous, she prepared to tell Lucas that evening. When he arrived home, tired but attentive, she approached him in the study. "I've been invited to show my work at a charity exhibition next month," she said carefully. He looked up, genuinely surprised. "That's wonderful," he said after a pause. "You should do it." She smiled, the first real one he'd seen in years. "I plan to." As the exhibition day approached, Lucas found himself watching her differently. The way her eyes lit up when she spoke about art. The way she moved with quiet confidence, the soft strength she carried like sunlight in a storm. It unsettled him because for the first time he wanted her not out of obligation, but out of something far deeper. The night of the exhibition, Evelyn wore a sapphire gown that shimmered under the lights. Her hair pinned elegantly, her presence radiant. Lucas stood beside her, dressed in his usual black suit, but there was something different about him too. A softer expression, a quiet pride he couldn't hide. As they moved through the crowd, people congratulated her, praising her talent. Lucas found himself watching her laugh, realizing how much he had missed that sound. Then Daniel arrived. He greeted Evelyn warmly, his hand lingering slightly too long in hers. "You were incredible," he said, his admiration obvious. "You've inspired everyone here." Lucas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. Evelyn noticed the flicker of emotion in his eyes, the faint shadow of jealousy that revealed more than words ever could. Later, as the event wound down, Evelyn stepped out onto the balcony for air. The night was cool, the city lights sparkling below. She didn't hear Lucas approach until he spoke softly behind her. "You were extraordinary tonight." She turned, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you," she said, smiling faintly. It felt good to be seen. He hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "I should have seen you long ago," he admitted, the words rough and hesitant, as if dragged from somewhere deep inside. "I spent years pretending I didn't care because I was afraid of what caring would cost me. But tonight, I couldn't look away." Evelyn's heart stilled. There was no arrogance in his tone, no cold distance. Just truth. She didn't know how to respond, so she said nothing. Lucas stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued, his voice low. "But I'd like a chance to start again, if you'll let me." For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. The wind played with a strand of her hair, and Lucas, almost without thinking, reached out to tuck it gently behind her ear. His touch was light, almost reverent. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't step back. "You can't erase 3 years of silence with one evening," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but maybe we can build something better on the ruins." Her eyes met his, and in that fragile moment something shifted between them. A quiet understanding, a spark of possibility. The distance that had once felt endless now seemed like a space waiting to be crossed. When they returned home that night, neither spoke much. But as Evelyn walked toward her room, she heard Lucas call her name softly. "Evelyn," he said, his tone gentle but firm. She turned, her heart thudding. "Good night," he said. It was simple, ordinary, but coming from him it meant everything. She smiled faintly. "Good night, Lucas." As she closed her door, she leaned against it, her heart trembling with a feeling she hadn't known in years. Hope. And in his study downstairs, Lucas sat in the dark, staring at the faint reflection of his wife in the glass window, realizing that for the first time in his life, he was no longer afraid of feeling. The distance between hearts, the following days unfolded like a quiet storm beneath calm skies. There were no grand declarations, no sudden confessions, only the subtle, trembling awareness that something fragile had begun to shift. Lucas had always been a man of precision, but lately his schedule had cracks in it. He came home earlier. He lingered longer at the breakfast table. Sometimes he found himself standing by the window of the kitchen, waiting to hear the sound of Evelyn's car pulling into the driveway. For 3 years, he had measured success in profits and power. Now he began measuring his days in glimpses of her smile, her laughter, her quiet strength. He found excuses to pass by her studio, sometimes pretending to ask about the foundation's reports, though he didn't really care about the numbers. What he cared about was the way she looked when she painted, focused, graceful, alive. Evelyn, for her part, didn't know what to make of the change. Part of her wanted to believe it, to surrender to the hope that maybe the man she had married was finally reaching for her. But another part of her, older, wiser, wounded, kept whispering caution. Words were easy. Patterns were hard to break. She had learned that silence could be louder than any lie, and she refused to be fooled again. One crisp autumn afternoon, she was in the Foundation's conference room, discussing new proposals when Lucas appeared unexpectedly at the door. His presence startled everyone. He rarely visited. "Mr. Blackwell," Daniel greeted politely, rising to shake his hand. "We didn't expect you." "I wanted to see the work firsthand," Lucas replied, his tone calm but his eyes briefly flickering toward Evelyn. As the meeting continued, he listened more than he spoke. When Evelyn presented her plan for a new shelter for women in crisis, Lucas leaned forward, genuinely attentive. For the first time, he didn't interrupt, didn't question her decisions, didn't try to assert control. Instead, when she finished, he said, "It's a strong proposal. You've done remarkable work." The room went still, surprised by the rare praise. Evelyn blinked, uncertain whether to thank him or question his motive. "We'll fund it," he added. "Completely." After the meeting, as everyone dispersed, Daniel lingered. "That was generous of him," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded, watching Lucas speak to an assistant across the room. "I think he's trying," she murmured, half to herself. Daniel's voice softened. "Just make sure he's not only trying to keep you, but trying to understand you." That evening, Lucas and Evelyn drove home in relative silence. The tension between them was different now, not cold, but alive, filled with the weight of things unsaid. As they entered the mansion, Lucas hesitated before heading toward his study. "Would you like to have dinner together tonight?" he asked suddenly. Evelyn paused, her hand still on the stair railing. It was such a simple question, yet it carried the weight of 3 years of absence. "Yes," she said finally, her voice quiet. "I'd like that." Dinner that night was awkward but genuine. They sat across from each other, the flicker of candlelight dancing between them. Conversation came in hesitant bursts. Safe topics at first, then slowly more personal ones. Evelyn spoke about her art exhibition, about the people she had met. Lucas listened, occasionally asking small, thoughtful questions. He told her about his father's legacy, the pressure of living up to a name that had become more brand than family. For the first time, she saw the man behind the armor. When the plates were cleared and the candles burned low, Evelyn stood. "It's late," she said softly. "Thank you for dinner." Lucas nodded, his expression unreadable, but as she turned to leave, he spoke again, his voice lower, hesitant. "Evelyn, do you ever think we could start over?" She froze. The words hung in the air like fragile glass. "Start over?" she repeated. He rose from his chair, his gaze steady but uncertain. "Not from where we were, but from where we should have begun." Her throat tightened. "And where is that, Lucas?" "With honesty," he said simply. "With trying." For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. Then she gave him a small, sad smile. "Trying is a good start, but I've lived 3 years on hope. I can't live on promises anymore." With that, she left the room, her footsteps echoing softly in the quiet hall. Lucas stood alone, the weight of her words pressing on him like a vow he didn't yet know how to fulfill. Over the next week, he tried harder. He began driving her to the Foundation some mornings, waiting outside like a man relearning patience. He sent her small notes during the day, simple words like lunch, or "You did great today." Evelyn read them with a strange mix of warmth and disbelief. It felt like he was trying to learn a language he had once refused to speak. But change, no matter how sincere, often stirs fear. Daniel noticed the shift immediately. One afternoon, as Evelyn left the office, he caught up with her. "You seem different," he said gently. "Is it him?" She hesitated, then nodded faintly. "He's trying." Daniel's expression softened, though his eyes held quiet concern. "Just promise me one thing," he said. "If he breaks your heart again, don't let it be the end of you." She smiled weakly. "It won't be." That evening, Lucas waited in the garden. The roses she had planted years ago were still in bloom, their scent soft and familiar. He heard her footsteps before he saw her. "You should wear a jacket," she said gently, her eyes flicking to his open collar. "You'll catch cold." He smiled faintly, something human and almost boyish. "If I do, will you make me tea?" She rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the smile tugging at her lips. They stood among the roses, the cool night air filled with the hum of distant crickets. Lucas turned to her slowly. "Evelyn, I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice unguarded. "But I want to learn. Tell me what I need to change." She looked at him, surprised by his vulnerability. "You can't fix this like one of your projects, Lucas," she said softly. "You can't just decide to make it work. You have to feel it." "I'm trying to," he said. "Every time I look at you, I wonder how I ever managed not to." Her heart gave a painful, hopeful twist. She wanted to believe him, but belief was a dangerous thing. "Then don't just say it," she whispered. "Show me." Days turned into weeks. Slowly, the house began to breathe again. Lucas started joining her in the garden on weekends, helping with the roses, though he was terrible at it. He burned dinner twice trying to cook for her. He laughed once, a real laugh, when she teased him about it, and the sound startled them both. Evelyn felt herself softening, even as she fought to stay guarded. But life, as always, found a way to test what was fragile. One afternoon, while Lucas was in a meeting downtown, Evelyn received a call from Daniel. "There's a gala next week in New York," he said. "We're being recognized for the Foundation's achievements. You should come." Evelyn hesitated. "Lucas might not like—" "It's your work," Daniel interrupted gently. "You deserve to be there." When she told Lucas that evening, his reaction was quiet but tense. "Daniel will be there?" he asked, his tone neutral but edged. "Yes, he's part of the team," she replied carefully. "Of course," he said, setting his glass down. "You should go." But his eyes told another story. He was proud of her, but he was also afraid. Afraid of losing her to the very world he had kept her away from for so long. The night of the gala arrived, and Evelyn left for New York, her heart a swirl of excitement and uncertainty. Lucas stayed behind, buried in work but unable to concentrate. Every hour that passed, he imagined her there, laughing, shining free. The thought twisted something deep inside him. When she returned late the next evening, he was waiting in the living room, still in his shirt sleeves, his eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. "How was it?" he asked. "Beautiful," she said softly. "We won an award." "I'm proud of you," he said, and she could hear the truth in his voice. "But," he added after a pause, "I missed you." Her breath caught. The words were simple, but they pierced deep. "You missed me?" she repeated softly. He nodded. "I did." They stood there inches apart, the air between them trembling. Lucas reached out, his hand hesitating before brushing against hers. This time she didn't pull away. "I don't know where this leads," she whispered. "Neither do I," he said. "But I'd rather walk into the unknown with you than live another day pretending I don't care." For a heartbeat, time seemed to still. Then Evelyn let her fingers entwine with his, tentative but real. For the first time in 3 years, their hands fit as though they had been waiting all along. In that quiet room, beneath the dim golden light, the distance between them began to fade, not through words, but through the simple truth of touch. The storm. Before the dawn for weeks, their lives unfolded in a fragile rhythm, too delicate to be called peace, too tentative to be called love. The air between Evelyn and Lucas had softened. There were smiles now, shared meals, even quiet laughter that filled the once empty halls. Yet beneath it all lay a current neither dared to name. Every gesture carried weight. Every silence carried fear. They were learning each other for the first time. Two people who had been married for 3 years but had never truly met. Evelyn often found herself replaying small moments. The way Lucas listened now, not just with his ears but with his eyes. The way his hand brushed hers at the dinner table. The quiet pride in his gaze when she spoke about her work. Each moment was a drop of water on the cracks of her guarded heart, slowly softening the walls she'd built. And yet, there was still distance, an invisible barrier made of years of neglect, of unsaid words that had fossilized into hesitation. Lucas noticed it too. He was doing everything differently now, leaving work earlier, asking about her day, inviting her to walk with him through the gardens at dusk. But each step forward felt like walking on thin glass. He could feel how careful she was around him, how she smiled but never fully relaxed, how her laughter, though real, carried restraint. He understood it. Trust wasn't something that could be demanded. It had to be earned, and he was willing to spend the rest of his life earning it. One evening, as the golden light faded through the windows, Evelyn sat in her art studio finishing a painting of the mansion's garden. Lucas knocked softly before entering. He carried 2 mugs of tea, something she used to make for him back when she still hoped he would stay long enough to drink it. "You made tea?" she asked, surprised. He smiled faintly. "I followed a tutorial. It only took me 4 tries to get it right." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "You're impossible." "Persistent," he corrected gently, handing her the mug. "There's a difference." For a while they sat in companionable silence, the only sound the brush gliding over canvas. "You know," he said after a long pause, "I've been thinking of taking some time off." Evelyn nearly dropped her brush. "You? Time off?" He chuckled. "I know. It's almost illegal." Then his voice softened. "But I thought maybe we could go somewhere. Together." Her heart thudded at the word together. "Why?" she asked carefully. "Because I want to know who you are outside these walls," he said. "And I want you to know me. Not the version that works until midnight and forgets how to live." The offer lingered between them like an open door. She didn't answer right away, unsure if she was ready. But the sincerity in his eyes made it hard to refuse. "Let me think about it," she said finally. "That's all I ask," he replied. The next day, Lucas left for a short business trip, his first since things had begun to thaw between them. Evelyn felt his absence more than she expected. The house felt colder, the silence heavier again. She spent most of her time at the foundation, buried in projects to keep her mind occupied. Daniel noticed the fatigue in her eyes. "You look like you haven't slept," he said one afternoon as they reviewed reports. She smiled faintly. "I haven't." He hesitated before speaking. "Is everything all right? With you and Lucas?" She looked away, unsure how to answer. "We're learning each other again," she said quietly. "It's strange, trying to trust someone you've lived beside for years, but never truly known." Daniel nodded. "He's lucky," he said softly. "Not every woman would give him a second chance." Evelyn didn't see the shadow that crossed his face as she turned away. That evening, Lucas returned earlier than planned. He entered the mansion quietly, tired but hopeful, eager to see her. He found her in the living room, sitting on the sofa, her phone still in her hand. She looked startled when she saw him. "You're home early," she said. "The meeting ended sooner than I expected," he replied, smiling faintly. Then his eyes flicked to the phone in her hand and froze when he saw the screen still lit. A message from Daniel Reeves glowed on the display. "Dinner was wonderful. I can't stop thinking about what you said." Evelyn noticed his expression change before she even realized what he was looking at. "Lucas, it's not—" But he had already turned away. "You don't owe me explanations," he said, his voice controlled but trembling beneath the surface. "You're free to see whoever you want." "Stop it," she said sharply, standing. "It's not what you think. We had dinner with the team after a meeting. That's all." "And what did you say that he can't stop thinking about?" he asked quietly, turning back toward her, his gray eyes dark and wounded. "You don't trust me," she said. "After everything, you still don't." "Trust is earned," he said, echoing her own words from weeks ago. "Then maybe you should try believing instead of measuring everything like a business deal," she shot back. "I'm not one of your mergers to be managed, Lucas. I'm your wife." The argument grew sharp, fueled by unspoken pain. Lucas accused without meaning to, and Evelyn defended without wanting to. Every word was a spark landing on old wounds. Finally, she said quietly, "Maybe we need some space." The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas stared at her, his chest tight, but he nodded. "If that's what you want." That night, he slept in his study again. The same room that had witnessed years of distance now held the bitter echo of something new: regret. Evelyn lay awake upstairs, her heart heavy. She hated that one misunderstanding could unravel so much fragile progress. But beneath her anger was fear. Fear that maybe they were doomed to always circle each other, never quite meeting. The next morning, the house was silent again. Lucas left early for work, leaving no note this time. Evelyn walked through the empty halls, the weight of the past pressing down again. She went to her studio and picked up a blank canvas, her mind swirling with emotion. Her brush moved furiously, pouring everything she couldn't say into color. When she finally stepped back, the painting showed two figures standing back to back, close, but facing opposite directions, separated by a wall of glass. Days passed. They spoke little, their communication limited to polite exchanges. Yet every night Lucas found himself stopping outside her studio, listening to the sound of her painting. He wanted to knock, to apologize, to explain, but fear kept him frozen. He had spent his whole life controlling everything, but now, the only thing he wanted was the one thing control couldn't guarantee: forgiveness. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Evelyn was invited to a press conference celebrating the Foundation's recent success. Lucas attended too, though neither expected to see the other. When he arrived and saw her standing at the podium, poised, confident, radiant, something inside him cracked open completely. She spoke not just of charity or projects, but of resilience, of learning to rebuild what life had broken. "Sometimes," she said, her voice strong but trembling slightly, "the hardest thing isn't letting go of the past. It's allowing yourself to believe that people can change." Lucas felt those words like they were meant for him. When the event ended, he found her outside, standing beneath the marble archway. "You were incredible," he said quietly. She turned, surprised by the softness in his tone. "Thank you." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Evelyn, I'm sorry," he said. "I let my fear ruin something that was finally becoming real. I don't want to lose you again, not to jealousy, not to pride." Her eyes glistened, but her voice was steady. "Then stop running from what scares you. Stop protecting yourself from love." He nodded slowly, the truth of her words sinking deep. "I'm trying," he whispered. "Then keep trying," she said. "Because I haven't stopped either." That night, they returned home together. The mansion was quiet, but the silence felt different. Less like a void, more like a beginning. They stood in the doorway, uncertain what came next. Lucas reached out, his hand trembling slightly. Evelyn looked at it, then at him. For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly she placed her hand in his. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't perfection. But it was something stronger, a choice to keep fighting for what still lived between them. And as their fingers intertwined beneath the soft glow of the chandelier, the walls that had held 3 years of silence finally began to crumble. When love finally spoke. The following morning broke with a golden calm that felt almost unreal. The sky outside the Blackwell mansion blushed with sunrise, casting soft light through the tall windows. The scent of rain from the night before still lingered in the air, mixing with the fragrance of the garden roses that Evelyn had planted years ago. She stood at the kitchen counter, absently stirring her tea, her thoughts distant. For the first time in a long while, she felt neither anger nor fear, just quiet exhaustion, and beneath it, a fragile thread of hope that refused to die. Lucas appeared at the doorway, still in his shirt sleeves, his hair slightly tousled from a restless night. He paused for a moment, simply watching her. In the pale light, she looked almost ethereal, soft but unyielding, the kind of beauty that came not from perfection but from survival. He cleared his throat gently. "Good morning." She looked up, surprised but not startled. "Good morning," she replied, her voice steady, polite but not distant. He walked toward her, stopping a few steps away. "I meant what I said last night," he began, his tone quiet but firm. "I'm done running from this, from you, from what we could be." Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She turned, leaning back against the counter, crossing her arms loosely. "You've said things before, Lucas," she said softly. And for a while I believed them. But words fade faster than silence. He nodded slowly. "Then let me show you." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed on the counter. He ignored it at first, but when the screen lit up again with multiple alerts, his eyes flicked toward it. Evelyn noticed the hesitation and frowned slightly. "You can answer," she said quietly. But he shook his head. "No," he said simply. "For once, business can wait." That was the moment she truly looked at him. Saw the difference not just in his words, but in his choices. For years, his work had been his refuge, his armor, his excuse. Now, for the first time, he was choosing something else. Her. They spent that morning together, not as strangers, but as two people learning how to be gentle again. Lucas helped her trim the garden hedges, poorly, but with laughter that filled the air like sunlight. Evelyn found herself smiling easily, freely, the way she hadn't since before their wedding. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was living beside him. She felt like she was living with him. As they worked, Lucas glanced toward her and said quietly, "I've been thinking about that trip I mentioned. There's a place my mother used to take me as a child, Lake Rivendell. It's quiet, far from the city. Maybe we could go there this weekend." Evelyn hesitated, caught off guard by the softness in his voice. "Just the two of us?" she asked. "Just us," he said. "No meetings, no schedules, no masks." Something inside her shifted, small and cautious, but undeniably real. "All right," she said finally, and his answering smile, small, hesitant, but filled with relief, made her heart ache in the sweetest way. That weekend, they drove out of the city, leaving behind the noise of glass towers and endless deadlines. The road wound through golden fields and tall whispering pines, the world growing simpler, slower, quieter. For hours they talked, about childhood memories, regrets, dreams they had never shared. Evelyn learned that Lucas's father had been harsh and controlling, and that his mother's quiet suffering had shaped his fear of love. Lucas learned that Evelyn had once wanted to open her own art school, but had given up the dream after the arranged marriage took her freedom. "Maybe it's not too late," he said softly, "for either of us." By the time they reached the lake, the sun had begun to set. The water shimmered like liquid gold, the air cool and still. They rented a small cottage overlooking the shore, modest but warm, its fireplace crackling softly as evening fell. Evelyn stood by the window, watching the lake ripple with fading light. Lucas approached quietly, stopping just behind her. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It is," he said, but his eyes were on her. For a long while they said nothing. The silence between them was no longer cold, it was full, alive, breathing. Then Lucas spoke, his voice low and unsteady. "Evelyn, I don't know what tomorrow brings. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes again. But I swear I'll never stop trying. I'll never choose pride over you again." She turned slowly to face him, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "You've changed," she whispered. "Not completely," he admitted, "but maybe enough to start becoming the man you deserved all along." He reached for her hand, hesitant, careful, and she let him. The warmth of his touch spread through her like light through stained glass. They stood there, hand in hand, the world outside fading to silver dusk. Later that night, as rain began to fall softly against the windows, they sat before the fireplace. Lucas poured 2 cups of tea, just the way she liked it now. "You're getting better at this," she teased gently. He smiled. "You taught me." The firelight flickered between them, painting gold across their faces. Evelyn set her cup down, her heart heavy with everything she had carried for years. The loneliness, the disappointment, the ache of waiting. "Lucas," she said quietly, "you hurt me deeply. Not with anger, but with absence. You made me feel invisible in my own life. I don't know if I can ever forget that." He nodded, pain flashing through his eyes. "I know," he said, "and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel that way again." She studied him for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "I believe you," she whispered. The words were soft, but they carried the weight of forgiveness, the kind that doesn't erase the past, but transforms it. Lucas reached across the small distance between them, his fingers trembling slightly as he brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. It wasn't passion that filled the space between them, but something deeper, peace, understanding, a love that had been carved slowly through pain and persistence. When she finally leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder, he wrapped his arm around her with a gentleness that spoke of both fear and devotion. For the first time since their wedding, They simply were, no expectations, no pretenses, just two people learning how to love in the language of quiet gestures. The next morning, the world outside was wrapped in silver mist. Lucas woke early and stepped outside, the air cool against his skin. Evelyn joined him, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Together they stood at the edge of the lake, watching the water ripple softly in the dawn light. "This place feels like a beginning," she said softly. He turned toward her, his gaze steady and tender. "Then let's make it one," he replied. She smiled faintly, her hand finding his. Their fingers intertwined, not out of habit, but out of choice. And for the first time in 3 long years, Evelyn Blackwell felt what she had almost forgotten: home.